Hello everyone, this is Tom Uren. I'm here with the Grugq for another Between Two Nerds discussion. G'day Grugq, how are you?
G'day Tom, finding yourself?
I'm very good. This week's episode is brought to you by Stairwell. I've got a discussion with Stairwell's Mike Wiacek about how security is a data search problem out on the podcast channel this week, and it's a very interesting discussion. Be sure to catch that. So Grugq, you just sent me a little while ago a report from a Russian cybersecurity company all about a Ukrainian, basically a Ukrainian hacking web panel. And
right.
It doesn't explicitly say it, but I presume it is from Ukrainian government forces.
Certainly seems like it's not from the cyber army or anonymous or anything, for sure.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into this report. There's, like, if you dig into it, there's lots of interesting stuff. Now, before anyone complains, the report is out there. The Russians have published it. We're not telling them anything they don't already know.
We're literally talking about the thing that they said that they know.
Yeah.
Right? Like they say, here's stuff we know, and we're going, okay.
Yep. And
let's talk about that.
We're examining, I guess the sort of archaeology of it, or the bureaucratic nature of development, stuff we love talking about. So what the report is about is basically the web panel that's the interface between an operator and their implants or perhaps the campaign. So it's a very, very long report. It's extremely comprehensive. It goes into a great deal of detail, and it has a whole heap of screenshots.
So we're going to describe those in minute detail for everyone who's just listening.
That's right. And it's this shade of green. So just as a top-level sort of summary, aggregates collected data from malicious campaigns. Well, they call them malicious. I'll just call them campaigns. It serves as an interface, provides centralized control over an entire network. It can generate new implants, manage sessions, collect statistics. It shows interactive maps of the victim's infrastructure. It does automated password guessing, and it also, you can create notes. So I was actually pretty impressed by the whole package. And not only that, it actually looked nice.
Yeah, it's very sexy, right? Like I remember back in my day, hacker interfaces used to be black and green. Right? Those were your color choices. But this, okay, technically it is black and green, but but it's really nice looking. It's written in React, I gotta say, which is, I think it's wild because it implies that at some point all operations are going to be suspended while they rewrite everything in Vue.
Yeah, so this web panel talks to other resources that do stuff. So it's just the interface. So they managed to grab the source code for this interface off a command and control box somewhere. They don't really say where. So my first question is, why is the interface so good? Because, like, traditionally you'd have a hacker interface and it's all like, if it's above command line, that's kind of nice. And it at least traditionally pushed work to the operator, and you just expected the operator to be good.
Like, there's two ways that a hacker interface can go. One of them is the, command line options, where if you get something wrong, it just prints a question mark and then waits for you to try again. Like, that didn't work. You try and guess. Yeah. Skill issue. And I think the other way is that the person developing it is showing off how capable they are. Right. So on the one hand, it's like this bare minimum interface where the user has to sort of struggle through all these esoteric hoops. And that way the user has status within the community for being able to master that.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And
I guess that's like from the days when hackers would be the people who would write interfaces.
Yeah, very much. Whereas I think, yeah, so it's sort of like the user has status for mastering the interface, or the developer has status for making a great interface. I think of the two options. You know, we were discussing this earlier. You had a pretty good theory about why you would do it.
Well, my thought was that if it is a bare bones interface, it's hard to scale your cyber operations because you've got to train your operators to a higher level. Whereas if you decide that let's devote effort to the interface and make it easier to use, we can get to trained operators quicker, and we can build stuff into the interface so we don't have to train them as much, and we can get them working quicker. I like that idea, but it's also possible that this is just the way that professional groups
we've
work
been
nowadays.
out of this for 20-something years, so...
And so
have computers changed in the last 20 years? I feel like they...
And it could be that in the early days, someone from NSA came along and said, hey, you should write an interface because this is how we do things, and it makes things a lot better. That's possible as well, I guess.
Yeah, I mean... So even the architecture, though, feels very much like... It feels to me like you got a web developer and says... Right, you're now part of developing this hacking tool, and the guy goes, "I don't do hacking tools. You know, I'm a user interface designer for a startup or something." And they say, "That's okay. Like, we'll tell you what to do. Here's the API you need to call to like interface with our stuff." And so the guy talks to their backend developer, and they get a REST API for a Go web server that does all the other stuff. And he just says, "Okay, great. I've got my REST API. Now I can write everything in JavaScript like I want to."
Yeah, it does feel sort of professional in that way. Like right at the beginning, it says there's a login, and the login uses Authentic, which is an open source platform for access management. And just as a disclaimer, Authentic's actually a risky business sponsor. so endorsed by Ukrainian hackers as the way to go. You know, single sign-on, integrates with protocols. And that's not something you do when you're just hacking together a platform, right?
Exactly. I mean, if it's an internal tool, then you don't have authentication. And then when you do add authentication, it's whatever the easiest PHP thing is, or the Django or whatever. But this feels very much like someone who builds websites and has been given a task, and so they're building a website like you need to build a web application that manages implants. Okay.
Yep.
I'll plug in the authentication thing that I know about. I'll, integrate with, just basically, they would take the stuff that they're told to do and they develop the UI.
Yeah. So there's also, I guess, the terminology the interface uses is also interesting.
So I think that one of the really cool things about this application is that it encapsulates the concepts of operations. So not the con-op, like here's how this operation is going to work, but like the operational concepts, the way that this unit, this group, thinks about doing hacking. Because the way that they've structured the elements within this sort of shows how they think things relate to each other and how they want to their tool obviously reflects their internal understanding of how they work. Yeah, and so there's sort of this interesting hierarchy that they have. And so they have this interesting set of roles and rights that you can have, which is session, binary, all sessions, beacon, collector, credentials, target host, target, admin, client, all target hosts. So very, very briefly, session is a specific connection to an actual implant. So it's sort of the lowest level of interaction. It's you only have connection to one specific implant, sort of thing, right? Binary, as far as I understand, is the ability to create new implants. So whoever did this development used great names and everything, but they didn't put up a readthedocs.com, and they haven't open sourced it, so we don't actually know. They haven't documented it well enough, is what I'm saying. So
Right.
there's a bit of guesswork going on. Collector, I feel, is like someone who's allowed to go in and look at stuff that's been collected, or maybe to task new collections, but isn't allowed to modify other stuff. And they probably don't use all of these because it seems far too granular to be manageable. So what's more interesting is target host versus target. So target seems to be their maybe an operation. It's sort of like they would say Gazprom would be a target.
Right.
And then within Gazprom, there'd be a database that they've hit, and that's going to be a host. Right. So they sort of have this sort of broader idea of a target being a collection of hosts, and hosts will have sessions that you can access. Then above targets, you're going to have your actual users who sort of fall into this broader category above that called client. And I think client is probably a misnomer because it's a holdover from whenever they started out, because it looks like it's just used as a sort of team name.
Yeah. So this report is based on just one web panel collected from one command and control server. My speculation is that there's one organization is using this web panel, or it's one campaign based on this web panel, and that there's other ones with different client IDs, and so it's client is a misnomer, and that would sort of make sense in terms of this is how advanced groups operate. You've got like separate groups, and those have separate campaigns, and you've got targets within those campaigns or targets within those groups, and then you've got actual hosts within the targets. So that all makes sense from a kind of meta point of view, and it's not clear to me whether client in this case represents a campaign or an organizational unit.
Yeah,
but it I think it's got to be one of those.
Yeah, my feeling is that it's going to be an organizational unit, because client seems like a holdover from a very early phase where it would have been, you're going to be developing this thing that's going to be used by our operational teams who are going to sort of, there'll be the clients that you administer, and we'll have an admin who's in charge of assigning different units to different targets, blah, 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 something like that. And it's just, that would have been the terminology that you start out with. And then as it goes on, you realize that that's not very good. But going back and changing everything just isn't worth it, because changing the name for an internal reference is pointless when you've got all these features you have to add.
Yeah. So in terms of the niceness of the interface, it'll do network maps of targets, and it'll label them with the operating system, whether it's a gateway, the type of link between the two hosts. If it's a host where you can't get access, it's one color, and if you had access and you've lost it, it's another, and if you've got root assets, it's green. So all that seemed very nice to me.
Yeah, I was just going to say, speaking of the nice interface, they actually have a change theme button so that they've got a light mode and a dark mode.
Now, that's a must-have nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, that was obviously a priority one.
Now, speaking of must-haves and priorities, it seemed like there are things in here that are not what you'd call first cab off the rank priorities. So right at the beginning, I mentioned this feature for automated password guessing based on already collected credentials from infected hosts, which seemed like a wonderful, nice-to-have feature.
Yeah, I don't think it's shipped with that in the version 1, right? But it does seem like the sort of thing that it's so useful that it's something you'd want to integrate. You're going to have your teams out there, and someone's going to say, look, like 70% of the stuff we get into is with password reuse. Like we get these hashes, and we should just, if we do password cracking, it'll save so much time from all these other things that we have to do. And it's going to be, obviously, the logins will be a lot easier. There'll be less logging, et cetera, et cetera. And so they went to the people developing this and they said, hey, can you integrate our password cracking with this, with, what we've been using for the interface? And, as long as there was an API to do it, the guy could just bang it in there. It looks quite hacker-like because the feature is called Hashtopolis. So they've got some hashing cluster, and this interfaces with that. You can just sort of pass tasks off to it and get them back. So it's absolutely a cool thing to have, and it probably greatly improves their performance. But it seems very much like not an afterthought, but definitely something that they developed after it had already shipped. Like
it seems like this
feature.
is the result of iterative development. It's definitely not something in the what's it called, the minimum viable product.
Yeah.
And similarly, they've got ability to create notes for targets and their associated hosts, supporting Markdown, and that seems also like that's a feature you'd want pretty quickly. But also,
I think early on you probably want. I think your MVP is it builds new binaries that you can implant. Like it builds new implants. It shows you implants that you've connected to. And it probably allows you to connect to an implant. Like it gives you a session. Like I think that's what you can get away with as bare bones. And then you build up from that.
Like if you're in a war and you think that cyber is important enough to have people doing stuff, this seems like the sort of features that you would add in the expectation that you'll continue using this indefinitely.
And I think there's some indications of that because this is, what's it called, Bulldog something.
It's a web panel related to the Bulldog backdoor malware.
Yeah. Okay. So this started out as a sort of like Bulldog backdoor web panel host control center panel thing, right? It just rolls off the tongue, and it's got this huge Bulldog icon as the logo in the middle. And that said, it also supports building binaries for backdoors that are not Bulldog.
Yep.
And so I think what probably happened was this was so nice that the other implants they're using have been modified to now work with this.
Or vice versa, I guess.
Yeah, they've said these other implants that we're using, they've got functional interfaces, but we don't really like them. We like this interface. Let's start using this interface for those as well.
Yeah, I think you said there were 9 different implants. Was that right?
Yeah. I think it supports 4 different classes.
Right.
Of like strains, and then 9 different types. So like DLL injection and things like that. Yep. Right. So it's quite comprehensive,
So one thing I was wondering about is why, we've talked about why the interface is so nice, but why does the report exist? Like it's extremely long. It's very, very detailed. And it sort of reminds me a bit of we spoke a long time ago about a report that the US government released into the Russian security services snake malware, the FSB. And in that case, it seemed like the purpose was to burn the malware by saying, we know so much about it.
Yeah.
In this case,
it's a web panel. I mean, you can't.
That's right. You can't burn it.
You're running it on your own infrastructure. There's no way that it makes sense to burn it. Yeah, I'm a little bit curious about that myself. I mean, they really go into a lot of detail. Usually when you see reports, it's going to be, threat actors doing this against, the victimology suggests telcos in the South Asia region. Here's some IOCs, MD5 sums.
Yeah, so I was wondering if it's because they're not a government contractor, but they want to be one. And so this is their marketing. Yeah. Look at this great job we did against this Ukrainian stuff.
I mean, it's obviously for marketing. I think it does feel like look at how on board I am
Right.
Like I'm definitely part of the team. I'm out there, pulling for Team Russia. And so I'm not sure whether that's targeted at their client base to show we're a patriotic organization, you should definitely buy from us, or if it's aspirational and targeted at the government to say, like, look how patriotic we are.
We'll have to see if their executive gets arrested by the FSB next week. So that, I guess, remains a bit of a mystery.
Some of the stuff that they list in here under the like the building binary interface, these seem very aspirational. Like, it's very easy to add an option in a menu.
Right. Yep.
And so it's a lot easier just to put them all in at the beginning, like AMD 64, ARM 64, 386, MIPS LE, and MIPS. So those last two would be if you're going after like smaller Soho routers and stuff like that. It feels like they've added quite a lot. Like, it's really comprehensive what all of these things can do, and that you can interface from this. It's so cool, right? Like, so you've got like agents, proxies, beacons, shells, collectors. I guarantee you it didn't start out like this.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I bet you in another 2 years, the person who inherits this is going to be so upset that it was built wrong. Right? There's going to be someone who has to come in and maintain this, and it'll have accreted so many different levels of functionality. They're gonna try and do a rewrite in Rust. That's what's going to happen. On this sort of binary creation interface, one of the things that is interesting is that when it builds the binary file, this implant that it's going to use, it creates a token, and then that token is linked to, that's what's used to authenticate and interact with the C2 server.
Right.
And then that token is also associated with the users, the target, and the client.
Right.
So one user can be linked to multiple binaries, and then obviously that's going to be linked also to the clients and stuff. So when an implant connects back, you can figure out who it belongs to.
Right. Yep.
And that, to me, that seems like it might be a little bit of an OPSEC fail if the database gets captured. So, like, one of the things they were saying is that they know of 7 user IDs. So when they were looking at this, they saw only 1 client ID, but 7 user IDs. So there's one team with 7 people in it, which sounds about right to me, which means that sometimes the operational databases do get captured. What I'm saying is you can maybe have the C2 server installed somewhere out on the internet, but you should make sure that the database is more tightly secured.
Yes. Yes. It does seem like having this in a report is an OPSEC fail, even though it doesn't really tell you about, it doesn't give you IOCs or anything like that. It's just not ideal.
So one of the things that I do like about this is how by going so deep down into the different interfaces and stuff, you can see quite a lot of how these operations work. Just in that, when you have credentials, right, you don't just get a username and password or something. You get it tied to a specific service. So, like, these are credentials for SSH or credentials for RDP or whatever. And then that's tied to a specific host, which is then tied to a target, which is then tied back up, right? So that to me speaks very much of someone who did a hack and wrote down usernames and passwords. And
That's right. Had a massive notebook which is just full of unusable information that's tremendously valuable.
Right. They're trying to brute force remember which thing goes to which. Yeah. It's like the story about how Linus added file system permissions for like read, writes, and stuff. Basically, he said he didn't need them, and then one day he accidentally deleted his entire disk. The next day, that turned into a top 1 priority, and suddenly, now there's permissions. And, originally, this was meant to be a sort of like bulldog interface, but now they've just added support for all these other things. But there's still other leftover legacy stuff, like the sessions, which, as we said, is the specific connection to a specific implant on a host. That is still called GS Netcat, which is the G socket.
Right.
Right.
Which is like a specific way of talking to a particular implant, right?
Right. It's a specific protocol of a specific type of implant that was specifically used. Yeah. So yeah.
So presumably that's the what is it? The
original.
vestigial, the original. It's like the appendix of the web panel.
You can take that out. You don't need it anymore. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's not an appendix, but it's used for more things than an appendix is. And
what I find quite cool is like the way that you get a session from this is when you click on a session, it will show you, like, basically it dumps a like something you can just copy and paste, which will have the command line string that you just need to paste into your terminal, and it will get you connected to that session on that implant. And that is the sort of thing that you add very, very quickly, because it is such a pain in the ass to do, just to type everything by hand, and it's not an impressive show of skills, right? Like typing a comma-separated list of IP addresses is not a cool skill to have. It's just annoying busy work, and computers are very good at that.
So that presumably means that once you're operating on the host, you have to do everything manually. Like there's no fancy GUI operations at that point. I wonder if we're going to see like another report in a couple of years where some of that is automated.
There's going to be a chat GPT side panel on this, and it'll be like, talk to your implants. I do think it's interesting. Like, it shows interesting history, that like these vestigial parts, it shows that there's been development of this, that this is a used tool. It has all the hallmarks of something that's been used long enough to be upgraded and patched and modified to work better.
It's like a living document where you can see the change history.
Yeah, very much. And I like how it encodes, sort of like, as I was saying, this sort of like ontology of operations, these concepts that they have, and the way that they think about things, where you've got, sessions and hosts and targets and users and clients, and just it's all like it's very much bureaucratic and structured. Right? It's not freewheeling.
I mean, who would have thought that hackers would think like that? What a mystery. I've just like reached the very bottom of the report, like, I don't know, 20 pages later. And they actually say why they have written this report. I don't know that I buy it, though. Researching and publicly discussing these threats is essential, especially for podcasters like us. It helps organizations and users understand the risks and take proactive measures. Groups like Sheddings.me, which is the Russian name for the threat actor, are constantly improving their tools, creating new, increasingly sophisticated implants and stealth techniques. Without analysing these threats, it is impossible to develop countermeasure strategies that can match the dynamics of the attackers, which is why we felt it was important to share this information with the community.
How does publishing the control panel help people understand the threats for... I mean, I certainly appreciate it, but... Now
there is another paragraph, and this is like exactly what we're doing, in fact. And it says, research into the front-end component of the attacker's command and control server infrastructure provides valuable information about their capabilities, the control mechanisms they use, and the methods they use to interact with infected devices. This, in turn, allows us to identify weaknesses in their operating models and improve efficiency of monitoring malicious activity. Now, again, like, I
don't buy that.
I think we've had an interesting discussion, but I think it tells us absolutely zero about how to stop Ukrainian hackers.
It's just Content for the content cards.
Thanks a lot, Grugq.